If you look at photographs of yourself from 20 or 30 years ago, you may notice that your teeth appeared lighter than they do today. Most people immediately think of coffee, tea, smoking, or inadequate oral hygiene, but the explanation is far more interesting. Teeth do not change color simply because substances accumulate on their surfaces. They also undergo internal changes throughout life, and these alterations affect the way light travels through the tooth and is reflected back to the observer. The fundamental point is that a natural tooth is not simply white. Its appearance results from the combined optical properties of enamel and dentin. Enamel is the outer, lighter, and relatively more translucent layer, whereas the underlying dentin exhibits a more pronounced yellow, orange, or warm hue. In younger individuals, enamel transmits and scatters light differently, reducing the visual dominance of the underlying dentin. With increasing age, however, enamel undergoes wear and may become thinner in certain areas. As a result, the optical contribution of dentin becomes progressively more apparent, and the tooth begins to acquire a warmer, more yellowish, or even slightly orange appearance. In other words, an older tooth does not have to be diseased to appear more yellow. Part of this age-related color change occurs simply because the natural color of dentin becomes increasingly visible through thinner enamel. However, dentin itself does not remain unchanged throughout life. Its internal structure evolves, as do its optical properties and the manner in which light is transmitted and scattered within it. With aging, changes in dentinal light diffusion contribute to a gradual shift from a lighter appearance toward darker and more chromatic shades. This brings us to an important concept in aesthetic dentistry: chroma. Chroma refers to the intensity or saturation of a particular hue. At this point, we are entering slightly into the world of art, or, more precisely, into the optical principles that determine tooth color. An older tooth is often not merely darker. Its yellow or orange component may also become more pronounced. In older patients, anterior teeth may exhibit a characteristic warm, almost amber appearance. This becomes particularly noticeable when enamel has become sufficiently thin for the more chromatic dentin to exert a stronger influence on the final perceived tooth color. Another important parameter is value, which refers to the relative lightness or brightness of the tooth. Young teeth generally have a higher value and therefore appear brighter. With increasing age, value may decrease, causing teeth to appear darker. Consequently, age-related yellowing should not be understood simply as a transition from white to yellow. More accurately, aging alters the entire optical system of the tooth. Dentin becomes more visually prominent, chroma increases, value decreases, and translucency and light scattering characteristics change. Naturally, extrinsic factors also play a major role. Coffee, tea, wine, tobacco, and various foods can produce surface staining. Smoking, in particular, may make teeth appear darker and more chromatic. There is no question that these factors can significantly influence tooth color. However, it is essential to distinguish extrinsic staining from intrinsic age-related changes. Removing surface deposits and pigmentation may make a tooth cleaner and lighter, but it will not necessarily restore the optical appearance that the same person's teeth had at the age of 20. The internal optical characteristics of the dental tissues have changed in the meantime. Another important point is that yellowish teeth are not automatically unhealthy teeth. Contemporary culture often equates whiteness with health, but this association is scientifically inaccurate. An individual may have naturally darker or more yellowish teeth that are completely healthy, while another person may have very white teeth affected by dental caries or periodontal disease. Tooth color is an aesthetic characteristic. It is not, by itself, a direct measure of oral health. Nevertheless, when a single tooth suddenly changes color and becomes gray, brown, or considerably darker than the adjacent teeth, the situation is different and warrants dental evaluation. Such discoloration may be associated with previous trauma, alterations in pulpal vitality, or another pathological process. When the entire dentition gradually shifts toward warmer and darker shades over the years, however, at least part of that change represents normal biological aging. What I find particularly fascinating is that the color of a tooth can, in a sense, reveal part of its biological history. A tooth that has functioned for decades, exposed to mastication, temperature fluctuations, acids, mechanical wear, and continuous changes within its own tissues, cannot be expected to remain optically identical to a young tooth. That should, ultimately, come as no surprise. This is precisely why the objective of high-quality aesthetic dentistry is not always to create the whitest tooth possible. The goal is to reproduce a tooth that appears natural in relation to the adjacent dentition, the patient's facial characteristics, and the patient's age. In many cases, a slightly warmer shade will appear considerably more natural than excessively white ceramic restorations. Therefore, the next time you notice that your teeth appear more yellow than they did in old photographs, do not immediately assume that coffee or inadequate oral hygiene is solely responsible. Part of the explanation lies much deeper, in the biological aging of the dental tissues themselves. Enamel changes and becomes thinner, dentin becomes increasingly influential, the transmission and scattering of light within the tooth are altered, and the overall brightness of the tooth decreases. The tooth, quite simply, ages with us. And this is precisely why an older tooth is not merely a darker version of a young tooth. It is an optically different biological structure whose color carries the traces of time. O youth, why must you pass?